You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos Country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos Country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me, as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, last time we were recording was right before the National Championship. I'm excited to get the chance to talk about that with you. Just, man, LSU, there was just no stopping that team this year.
Yeah, one of the teams of destiny. Really enjoy Joe Burrow, enjoy a lot of their defensive prospects, the offensive talent. I mean, Jamar Chase might be the best wide receiver prospect in football. And then you have Derek Stingley, who might be one of the best cornerback prospects in football right now. Neither of them are eligible. And then, of course, Joe Burrow. And then taking down Clemson. Trevor Lawrence's first loss in the history of him in college. And, it was really just a good game. It felt a lot like that Houston Chiefs game where the Clemson got ahead early, but the LSU offense is just so good, so overpowering that it was never out of reach. And then once they started rolling, it felt like it was like, uh-oh, here we go.
Yeah, it definitely did. They had no answer. There's no way you can cover some of those players. Jamar Chase, you can't cover that guy one-on-one. That's just asking for trouble. But at the same time, they had to because they were trying to blitz and get pressure. And it just, nothing was working. You try to stay back in coverage, they'll tear you apart. You try to blitz, they'll tear you apart. So they're just, that offensive system was just so well run this year. They had all the right pieces, all at the right time. I'm excited to talk about some of these prospects that they showed in that game because definitely some that I wouldn't mind being on the Broncos here come April. For both teams, really. I mean, these are two loaded teams with first-round talents everywhere on their rosters. But, LSU, like you said, team of destiny. They just were made for the championship this year. The fact that they just beat so many top 10 teams to do it just shows, again, how dominant this team was, why they should be regarded as at least a top 3 team in college football history. They can make an argument in so many different ways for top teams like that Miami 01 team. But, probably the best team I've really paid attention to that I've ever seen.
They are really talented. I don't think they were as dominant defensively as some of the other all-time great teams, but that offense, so good. And I'm so glad that, the 6-3 SEC football, it has come and gone. You have to score points and, throw the ball around the yard to win games in college football. And that's just so much more pleasing to watch. I do enjoy myself a good defensive slugfest, but when it's, run up the middle, punt for, 19/20ths of the game, that's not as fun. So that's much more enjoyable.
Right.
So.
No, you're right. And it's just crazy to see SEC quarterback play, how much that has just changed. Where you're going from quarterbacks that don't even get drafted to now top 5 talents coming to the SEC. So, you're right. There's been this huge change, and the SEC's kind of seen how other teams, they saw how Ohio State a few years ago really dominated, and I think that really brought about some changes there in the SEC. It's wide open on how those things are done today. All right, well, we got a great show for you today. I'm very excited. We have a guest coming on today. He works for The Athletic covering the Vikings, Arif Hasan, and very, very excited to have what he has to say about the Pat Shurmur and just what he brought to the Vikings when he was there. And a few other topics that we're going to get to on the Vikings that we're excited to ask some questions for him. And then also, we're going to get into this national championship, kind of breaking down some prospects and seeing who the Broncos might really be looking at come April. Because, like I said, there's some major talents and some talents at some positions the Broncos absolutely need. So very excited to get into that. But I want to make sure you can find us on Twitter. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH and Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. You can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod, and make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input on our show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, a new affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Also, know that this podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
For anyone who's been down that road, living with chronic pain is the worst. It's more than a feeling of discomfort. It can affect your whole life. Many of our listeners probably have some type of pain that has prevented them from relaxing and sleeping or has stopped them from exercising. Perhaps it's been ongoing for a few weeks now and hasn't improved with any of the treatments they've tried. Enter Omax Health. If you're looking to get rid of nagging muscle and joint pain immediately while providing long-lasting recovery, then you need to try the natural breakthrough pain relief solution, CryoFreeze CBD Roll-On, developed by Omax Health. This non-prescription, triple-action pain relief roll-on is especially formulated to block pain receptors, reduce inflammation, and improve muscle and joint flexibility. The best part is, this is 100% natural, a CBD-powered remedy, and it works its magic within 10 minutes of application, and the relief lasts up to 8 hours, which is much longer than the over-the-counter alternatives. Omax Health is offering our listeners 20% off a full bottle of CryoFreeze CBD Pain Relief Roll-On plus free shipping. This discount also applies toward any product site-wide. Just go to omaxhealth.com today and enter code OVERTIME. That's OMAX health.com and enter code OVERTIME to get 20% off CryoFreeze and site-wide.
All right, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. We've kind of been hinting that we were going to have a guest on to really dig into Pat Shurmur, and just very, very excited we have Arif Hasan joining us. He is a writer for The Athletic on the Minnesota Vikings. And just want to welcome you on, man. We really appreciate you coming on. You've been highly recommended to us from people around the NFL when it comes to just talking about this, man, and just kind of giving us a really good idea of what the Broncos can expect this year.
Yeah, I appreciate all those people who are willing to lie about me. I'm sure it'll be a good show.
Yeah, me too. I was just reading your article actually of where do the Vikings go from here. And really, really enjoyed that, even though we're not Vikings people, just kind of seeing where their team's going to go, because there's a lot of moving pieces, it seems like, especially
a
out
lot
there.
of
OC.
tough questions to answer. Yep.
Yeah. So, but anyway, let's kind of dig in here to Pat Shurmur. And I just want to ask you a little bit here, just to start off with, what do you know about some of his kind of main influences when it comes to his offensive system and how he's become the offensive coordinator that he is today?
Well, he's kind of an interesting one. I remember when he was first promoted to offensive coordinator from being an interim, or from being the tight ends coach of the Vikings, and taking over partway through the season. There was a surprising amount of kind of intrigue surrounding him because he had spent time in Chip Kelly's offense in Philadelphia, and no one really knew kind of what his job in Philadelphia was, because Chip Kelly had all of this control over the offense. And we didn't actually get to see, a ton of what Shurmur did when he was the interim head coach. And so it was kind of unusual to try and figure out. Before that, he was with the St. Louis Rams from, I say 2009 or so. And that team, they ran, a West Coast offense. That's kind of where he became familiar with Sam Bradford, which is kind of like a big part of a big part of why he was kind of so intriguing to the Vikings, because he's got that history with Sam Bradford. As he became kind of a member of the Vikings, we knew that this was, it's going to be a West Coast offense, but as that doesn't mean a ton by itself, right? And so how did he perform after he took over Mike Martz's Air Coryell offense and all that? What does that mean for the Vikings? How much did he learn from Chip Kelly? And what I found was that it was really a lot of traditional West Coast stuff. Like, really likes to get rid of the ball quickly, really likes to, engage in things like crossing routes, mesh concepts, making sure that you can replace some of the run with the pass, and making sure that the quarterback is always kind of in rhythm and in timing, which made for a really unique problem, of course, when Case Keenum took over after Teddy Bridgewater went down, because he's absolutely not that kind of quarterback. So when he had Sam Bradford, his ability to make sure that there was always going to be a receiver open underneath, kind of no matter the coverage, was a big part of how that offense ran. And I think that has a lot to do with his time in Philadelphia. I think that did influence him, at least from a passing concepts sort of understanding. And then also I think that he just generally, he's had kind of the bones of even from his time in Stanford, the bones of, West Coast offense is just kind of in the way that he builds playbooks and play calling.
Yeah, I was thinking of a lot of people kind of expected, it kind of came out after the Broncos fired their OC that they were looking for somebody that would be a lot more aggressive. And when you watch Pat Shurmur, it's not that you're going to all of a sudden see just tons of just deep balls all over the field. It's not going to be a Bruce Arians air it out kind of system, but it is kind of, you find that open guy, he's able to have that one-on-one situation and be able to take it for some big yards and big chunks kind of thing. And so it's just kind of interesting when they say that, but really his system isn't quite that. It's the big plays come in different ways.
Yeah, it does, and he spent time with the Eagles back when Andy Reid was there, and they run a West Coast system, and they're a much more aggressive West Coast offense. Even back then, I think in 2009 it was or 2001 it was like they're transitioning to Donovan McNabb, and he threw the ball a little bit further downfield than a lot of West Coast quarterbacks do. Obviously with Mike Vick, Kevin Kolb, they were a little bit more aggressive. Andy Reid right now with the Kansas City Chiefs, they were more aggressive, but primarily it was about making sure that the quarterback was able to complete passes. And that was kind of the goal, because you're always able to generate first downs unless something catastrophic happens, like with, Kirk Cousins against the 49ers. If you're completing passes, you tend to generate first downs. And that seems to be kind of the philosophy. It's not nearly as aggressive, I think, as a lot of teams in the modern NFL right now, but I don't think it's necessarily outdated. I just think it's kind of a different approach. Drew Brees ran kind of a similar style. Jimmy Garoppolo is running a pretty similar style. So obviously you can generate a lot of offensive success that way. But for people who might be looking for deep downfield shots, it's entirely possible that Shurmur's changed. He had to change his offense for Case Keenum. So it's very clear that he's kind of willing to change kind of what works for the offense based off of the quarterback he has. And for Drew Lock, I would definitely expect that. But historically, quarterbacks have thrown at a lower depth of target with Shurmur than they have with anyone else. So before you think, well, he worked with Sam Bradford, Bradford throwing short isn't necessarily new. Bradford threw it shorter from an average depth of target perspective with Shurmur than he did anywhere else. Case Keenum did the same thing, shorter with Shurmur than he did anywhere else except most recently in Washington. He actually threw a shorter depth of target, but everywhere else he threw a little bit further downfield. The same is actually true for Teddy, who's already a notoriously conservative quarterback. And you go back through Shurmur's kind of timeline and you see quarterbacks with him tend to throw shorter from an average depth of target than they do when they have another coordinator. That's not to say it's not efficient. Case Keenum obviously had his best year with Shurmur. I would argue Bradford had his best year with Shurmur. So it clearly was effective for those quarterbacks. But if people really just want big plays, I don't know that they'll be super excited about Shurmur. If they want kind of like an efficient offense that can drive down the field, historically he's done a pretty good job of being able to produce that.
A lot of people have been conflating his time under Andy Reid, meaning that the Broncos are bringing over that Chiefs offense to Denver.
Yeah, it was like a decade ago. I think
exactly.
It's divergent evolution at that point. Andy Reid has evolved his offense really substantially since then. Pat Shurmur has evolved his understanding of offense pretty substantially since then. Andy Reid's offense now doesn't look anything like it did a decade ago. So that's a little bit of wishful thinking. But also, I mean, Andy Reid's really successful as an offensive coordinator. I can see why people want to pull back or pull into what he's doing now and say, hey, that history they have, might mean some pretty good things. But no, I don't think that they'll look very similar at all.
Yeah, that's my thought as well. Also, when you have a Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, you can do other things that most teams can't.
Yeah, and I think, and we saw that with the Vikings too. When you have Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, you can do a couple different things than you normally otherwise would, and it's a lot different than what it looks like with Tyreek Hill and Patrick Mahomes. So, and I think that's maybe one of the best benefits that you get from Shurmur is that he's ultimately or inherently a fairly conservative play caller, but he does clearly adjust his offense to the types of receivers that he has. Like when he was in Cleveland, he did a pretty good job finding ways to get their athletes into space and stuff like that. So, yeah, there's a lot more tight end usage when it was kind of appropriate, a lot less tight end usage with the Vikings, a lot more tight end usage in Cleveland. So it's clear that the offense is flexible, but yeah, ultimately, inherently a fairly conservative play caller.
Well, let's dig into a little bit of, you talked about how he kind of fits it to who's over there. Does he have some personnel packages that he prefers compared to, like here in Denver, they've been really big into the 2 tight end set, 2 running back set, kind of really scrunching everything in. And we've kind of heard about how Shurmur really likes to space things out. Are there certain packages he likes, and is there certain kind of weapons that really Bronco fans should kind of be paying attention to when we're talking about the draft coming up, looking at wide receivers, maybe running back types? Have you seen any kind of tendencies in that?
Yeah, so I would argue that it's a little bit more spread out. It's not nearly as spread out as some of the other offenses you see, and it's certainly not like anything like the Rams where they, it's like pulling teeth to even get a tight end on the field. He does run 11 personnel, I think, more than the rest of the league does. At least in 2017, he ran 11 personnel like 55, 56% of the time. The league at the time was under 50. Now it's over 50, but at the time the league was under 50%. And that means, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. There was a lot of talk about getting 2 tight end sets with the Vikings. And honestly, when you take a look at the data, they ran 2 tight end a lot less often than the rest of the league. You take a look at 12 and 22 personnel, 22 a little bit higher, 12 a little bit lower, and ultimately fewer tight ends on the field on the average snap. So they did consistently put a tight end on the field. For the Vikings, it was Kyle Rudolph. I'm trying to remember the name of the Browns tight end who had just this amazing year, like 1,000-yard. Gary Barnidge, that was it.
Yep.
Just out of nowhere. And obviously, I don't know how much influence he had over the Giants, but obviously they were pretty big fans of using Evan Ingram. So they clearly will feature a tight end if there's a tight end talented enough, and it seems like there is. Certainly, the best rookie tight end right now seems to be Fant. So he's got the athleticism for somebody you want to feature, kind of like Evan Ingram, but a little bit faster. I would imagine there's a feature in the offense for the tight end, but I wouldn't imagine that means also putting another tight end on the field. It just didn't happen all that much. And Minnesota had at the time a really good blocking tight end in David Morgan that, there were ways to put him onto the field and use him as an asset. And the Vikings ultimately went in another direction. It was still a pretty efficient offense, but they didn't have wide receiver depth. They just didn't have a third wide receiver, and they still put, that third wide receiver on the field. So I would expect to see that if that kind of tracks with what happens in Denver. Again, I'm not super familiar with what he did with the Giants. My understanding was that there was a little bit more 11 personnel than the rest of the league, but not dramatically so. But yeah, it was really about 3 wide receivers. It was really about 1 tight end, and then the running back typically just has to be able to catch passes. I wouldn't say that there was a prototype. It's just you don't want like your Adrian Peterson, catching is kind of a secondary concern sort of thing. But, he's been comfortable with bell cows. He's been comfortable with committees. Dalvin Cook went down 4 weeks into the season with him, and they switched to a committee between Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon, and that worked out pretty well in terms of generating production from the running back position. It earned McKinnon a pretty huge contract in the offseason. I don't think that there's a prototype for running back. I just think they have to be able to catch passes. Murray is a power back, but he's pretty good at catching passes. McKinnon's thing is that he can kind of do everything, and so he was able to catch passes. I don't think that you necessarily need an all around like Dalvin Cook or Saquon Barkley, but you need to be able to even run a little bit between the tackles, which Dalvin Cook is not a huge between the tackles runner, but he has the ability to do it, and you need to be able to catch passes. But for the most part, if there's like a 6'1", 230-pound running, I have no idea who's in the draft right now. I'm going to find out next week. But if there's that guy, a 230-pound, 6'1" guy, they're not necessarily going to value him any more than your 5'9", 190-pound spark plug if the spark plug can run between the tackles as long as he can also catch and has enough ball carrier vision to kind of get the offense going.
I do want to expand upon that with the running back. Specifically, is it the running back that needs to be able to flex out and run intermediate to a little bit, maybe potentially more advanced routes, or is it simply dump offs, take advantage of the space there, the kind of just the last option?
With Cook, it was more the latter, and he's a pretty good route runner in that context, but he can't run, or he hasn't been asked to run, at least with Shurmur or since then, many receiver routes with the Vikings. But with McKinnon, yeah, they had him run out of the slot. They had him motion out and create additional space and have him run receiver routes. With Murray, it was kind of back to the same routes that Cook was running. Barkley, as I understand it, splits out a decent amount of time and runs kind of receiver routes and stuff like that. So I think, you just have to be able to catch passes, and then from there he'll figure out what plays will work for that running back given their skill set. So some running backs have the ability to split out, and if they can, he'll use them that way. If they can't, he'll still want to get them involved in the passing game in some way, but maybe kind of running more traditional running back routes.
And kind of speaking to the running back position there, I guess now we'll go to the guy that's usually right in front of him, the fullback. The Broncos for the last couple of years have really been pretty big on the fullback because they've had that Kubiak system, Shanahan system, whatever you want to call it. And but really under Shurmur, it kind of looks like fullback doesn't really have a whole lot of value.
Yeah, I was actually a little bit surprised that the Vikings decided to keep a fullback when Shurmur was the full-time offensive coordinator. But they did, and so they ran a fullback. They ran the fullback a lot less than they have this year. And like it's a Kubiak Shanahan style offense that tends to like having a fullback. And so the Vikings, I think, were second in fullback usage across the NFL. Obviously behind, Juszczyk and the 49ers, who I think led the league in fullback snaps despite missing 2 games or something like that.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, right, exactly.
He's so good.
Yeah, I mean, they're having him run George Kittle routes, so just get him on the field. But yeah, the Vikings ran fullbacks a lot more after Shurmur left, but they still had a fair amount of 2 running back sets, about league average, I think, at the time in terms of 2 running back usage. It was something like I think you had it just under 20%, something like 18%, and league-wide was like 19% or something like that. It was a pretty trivial difference in terms of the amount of times there was a second running back on the field. Typically employed on third and short and goal line packages, where you'd expect to use a fullback if somebody was not using a fullback very often. I think it might be contingent on personnel. I mean, Janovich is a pretty good fullback, so I think he'll make the team, and then they'll find ways to use him.
And I do want to expand upon that fullback just a little bit. Who thought you'd have a 2-part fullback question? Andy Janovich is kind of a little bit more the typical, runs up that A gap, will take out a guy in an ISO play. But they also have this guy named Andrew Beck, who's kind of a tight end H-back fullback, which
West Virginia guy, right?
I believe he is. Oh man, no,
I'm thinking of Wesco. Yeah, I'm thinking of
Wesco. Andrew Beck came from Texas. He's 6'3", he's 260, and good athlete, but he's much more of an H-back, tight end, fullback hybrid, where Andy Janovich is more of that blocker. Would you see being utilized more of the passing option with an Andrew Beck or the running option with an Andy Janovich, or does it just simply come down to whatever personnel is the best, whatever the situation calls for?
Yeah, well, I would probably expect Beck to be moved or to be classified as a tight end in that scenario because David Morgan's very similar. They even had David Morgan line up at fullback. And so, he's a pretty good pass catcher, but, he ran like a 5-second 40. He's slow. So they don't have him run like downfield, and he doesn't generate a ton of separation, but if the ball's near him, he'll catch it. Yeah, they liked the versatility that someone like Morgan has, but again, they didn't run 2 tight end all that much, and they didn't run 2 running back all that much. They had a combination of both. Both made the team. Both found ways to contribute, and both probably could have contributed more on another team, especially if the other one wasn't there. This year, the Vikings just didn't have David Morgan, and they, like I said, were second in the league in fullback usage. Maybe that changes when Morgan comes back. And I would imagine with someone like Pat Shurmur, it's actually not too different just in terms of the interchangeability of both, but still having the capability to use both. They lined, like I said, with Shurmur, they lined Morgan up at fullback sometimes, and line tight end, nub, wing. He would pull across the formation on arc blocks and stuff like that. And he was a little bit more versatile in terms of the blocking angles you could create with him. But like I said, they still employed C.J. Ham, who is a lot like Janovich in that way, in that he doesn't do much else besides like block on ISO and stuff like that. He does have like a bunch of like 30-yard catches and stuff like that, but that's he was like a check down and there's like 8 years of space in front of him. So that's kind of how that happened.
I figured as much. All right. We should probably take a quick break here, actually. Running, obviously, a little bit long. This has been great so far. We have some more questions here that we got to get to, but got to tip our hats to the sponsors here. We'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I'm Nick Kendell along with Carl Dumler and our special guest today, Arif Hasan, who covers the Vikings for the Minnesota Vikings. You can find him on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL. That's ArifHasan. And we are talking about Pat Shurmur, the new Broncos offensive coordinator, and what he brings to this Denver team. A lot of good information so far, but now we're going to kind of shift it to probably the thing that Broncos country is the most interested in, and it is this claim that Pat Shurmur, is a quarterback guru of sort. Now, you've talked about some of his previous quarterbacks that he's had, Sam Bradford, obviously, Case Keenum. I mean, he's also had Colt McCoy, a good season from Daniel Jones this past year, if you're not including all the turnovers, including the fumbles and whatnot. But, rookie quarterback, it's going to happen. So I guess the big question here is, what would you say as far as Pat Shurmur being this quarterback guru?
It's pretty difficult to say, just because all these quarterbacks had maybe their best year with him, and that's incredibly encouraging, right? I don't know how involved he was in terms of making sure that those quarterbacks improved their skill set, so much as making sure that he created an offense that was really ideal for that quarterback to operate from. And for a veteran quarterback, there's not a difference between the two. It's like a distinction without a difference. For a young quarterback, that is a really important question, whether or not he's improving the skill set or whether or not he's improving the offense around them. But I will say that the development that Bridgewater seemingly took between his second year in the offense and his third year before the injury took him out for the next 2 years was, I think, remarkable. Again, that's stuff that we get from preseason and camp, and it's just not a super great sample to draw from. But, he was spinning the deep ball way better than anybody had ever seen covering the Vikings. And people who had covered the Vikings for the last 3 years are very familiar with what a Bridgewater camp performance looks like. And he looked astonishingly better in that third year, which is kind of like what makes the legend of his injury so captivating. He was set for an MVP year or whatever, right? So it's pretty easy to blow that one up out of proportion, but he did look a lot better. And those preseason games looked a lot better for him. And they had figured out kind of what he needed, whether it was kind of mechanical or what have you, to be more comfortable throwing a deep ball with a lot of accuracy. And so from that perspective, we saw him kind of improve the skill set. Norv Turner tried to get Teddy Bridgewater to kind of accelerate his release and get that release to get going faster. He had a lot of difficulty doing that. But with Shurmur, it seemed like kind of if he was giving alternate mechanical advice or if it was a different quarterback's coach or whatever, it was a lot easier to get him to accelerate that release time. So the evidence that I've seen suggests that he can do both, that he can develop quarterbacks a little bit better and that he can develop offenses for that quarterback to thrive in a little bit better. But it is pretty difficult to kind of figure out because, Keenum, when he left the Vikings, immediately cratered. And a lot of it is just, hey, he had a lot of luck. That has nothing to do, with the offense or the supporting cast or, his skills development or anything like that. A lot of that luck just ran out. But if it was true skills development, I think we would have seen better seasons from Keenum after he had left. And so that suggests that a lot of it had to do with, like I said, luck and also designing an appropriate offense that works for him. So it is pretty difficult to say. I would say that there's pretty good evidence to suggest both, but nothing really definitive, right? So I wish I could give a better answer, but I mean, that's kind of why these coaching firings and hirings happen, because it's very difficult to know.
Just looking back at the players that have worked under him, the quarterbacks, you do see kind of like this about 3 to 5% bump in their accuracy. And like you said, I think that is a big part of just like the system that is set up, that it is set up for success, that there are a lot of those easy throws that help them out to get them comfortable. And like you said, he also does design the offense really around the skill set of the player, going from like a Sam Bradford who couldn't be more opposite from a Case Keenum. And
right,
the kind of plays that he's calling for each of them. And instead of being that square peg, round hole kind of thing, he actually really does kind of go, okay, you're a square peg, we're going to call square peg kind of plays.
Yeah, and I think that's the most definitive thing that you can say about him, positive or negative, is that it's very clear that he adapts the offense to the skill set of at least his quarterback, if not kind of the rest of the other players on the roster. Knowing that Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs are really great at winning contested catches, and knowing that Case Keenum takes a lot of chances, the route concepts were much deeper when Case Keenum took over than when it was supposed to be Teddy Bridgewater's offense or when Sam Bradford had the offense. So, they knew that Keenum's going to get the ball out late, but he wants to throw a little bit more aggressively. That's going to create contested catches, but we're okay with that. And that year, Diggs and Thielen led the league in not just winning the total number of contested catches, but in contested catch rate. And so that kind of helped Keenum's skill set. They knew that Diggs and Thielen were pretty good at working back to the quarterback, so there were a lot more curl concepts in a Keenum offense than there were in a Bradford offense that wanted, Diggs and Thielen out in space because they're also pretty good after the catch. But Keenum is just not great at leading receivers in yards after the catch. So you wanted to get those throws kind of behind the sticks instead of in front of the sticks. And so, those kind of small changes in the way that they ran those route concepts really made for an offense that fit what those quarterbacks and receivers could do. If there's like an incongruity between what the receivers can do and what the quarterback can do, I don't know. I guess you're just kind of out of luck. But I don't know that any offensive coordinator can work themselves around that. So given that, I think that Shurmur has done a really good job crafting offenses that really fit what his quarterbacks can do and what those skilled position players can do within the confines of what that quarterback can do, and trying to figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of different route concepts are and how they interact with the skill kind of trees or the skill tools that all those players have.
All right, well, let's dig in a little bit, getting away from the quarterback now to the blocking scheme. This has been, I think, one of the more confusing things that's been kind of going through Broncos country right now is the Broncos have been running a zone scheme here for quite a while. Like I said, with the Kubiak Shanahan system, that's always going to be more zone than gap scheme. But some people have kind of gone back and forth whether he likes the gap scheme or whether he likes the zone scheme or a mix of the two. What have you really seen and how to expect the offensive line to do this year?
I don't think he has a huge preference. I think he tends to just rely on a run game coordinator, which is the same thing nowadays as an offensive line coach, and kind of have them figure it out and work plays off of that, because you're right. He's got a history, with Chip Kelly, they had to run, zone because it's Chip Kelly's offense. There's a lot of inside zone, a fair amount of outside zone, and some split zone. So, with Kelly, obviously that team ran a lot of zone running, but, if Shurmur's not in charge of that offense, maybe that doesn't tell you much about Shurmur. I am not super familiar with what the Giants did offensively. My understanding was that it was kind of a mix of man and zone. With the Vikings, it was a mix, and I think that was a product of having an offensive line coach that wanted a really complex running game. And so I think kind of depends on which offensive line coach they hire. I have no idea if the Broncos have hired one yet, or if they're kind of retaining who they have.
Yeah, they're keeping Mike Munchak.
Okay. Oh, well, also, if it's Munchak, then they're probably just going to defer to him. Yeah, I think he kind of doesn't care. I think he's pretty up to relying on the offensive line coach to kind of design what that run game is going to look like. So, especially if it's someone as well-respected an offensive line coach as Mike Munchak.
Right, that makes a lot of sense that you'd kind of lean on that kind of support to trust him with that kind of thing. He has plenty of experience, plenty of clout to be able to make that kind of call. Well, let's kind of talk about some play designs then. Does he have any kind of favorite concepts that he likes to run in the run game or in the pass game that you can kind of see just to kind of narrow down a little bit? I mean, like you said, he likes to kind of expand his playbook depending on the players, but are there some concepts that really show up no matter where he is?
Mesh, I think. Crossers running from both sides of the field, that they cross each other. It tends to work really well against man coverage because you create rubs, but it does work pretty well against zone coverage because you're widening these zones and then forcing these players into conflict. It really creates after-catch opportunities for some of the fastest players. You can audible pretty easily into slants off of it if you suspect that there's going to be a blitz coming or something like that, and you need somebody to run hot. And it does a really good job of taking advantage of some of the tendencies that linebackers have in covering like tight ends off the line, if it's a Y mesh or a Y cross or something like that. So mesh seems to come up a lot. It doesn't seem to like throws to the sideline all that much. If you're a quarterback like Case Keenum who likes to wait, a lot of the crossers turn into sideline throws. But for the most part, likes to take advantage of what's happening in the middle of the field. My sense was that there was not a ton of play action in the offense, compared to the rest of the league. And that's always kind of changing because the rest of the league is pushing more and more towards more play action. I would expect that with a young quarterback like Drew Lock and with a play action heavy scheme in the run game, there's going to be more play action. And that's kind of part of the flexibility that you'd expect from somebody like Shurmur. But with the Vikings, there wasn't a ton of play action. I just didn't see a ton of super deep shots, didn't see corner routes, didn't see, the sideline stuff tended to be quick outs and stuff like that. There were option concepts where receivers had to adjust their route based off of kind of what they were seeing. Y option out of the slot was a pretty popular one. Not as popular as it is for like the Saints, but reading the leverage of the defender out of the slot, whether it's a tight end or a slot receiver, and choosing out or in based off of that leverage, and then kind of making that the first key for the quarterback, create some pretty easy completions and create some after catch opportunities and stuff like that. But really over the middle, while the player is moving. I mentioned that there were curls and comebacks with Keenum, but typically there aren't. They like to get the receiver moving so that there's after-catch opportunities available, and less stuff where the receiver kind of has to make a big play on their own, unless, again, if it's Keenum.
Would there be any, weaknesses or kind of things that really frustrated you with his system that he ran there that make you kind of go, man, I wish he would do more of this?
It is tough to be frustrated when, you expected the season to crater.
That's fair.
So, it's crap, he ran it on second and long. Whatever. It's not like I trust Case Keenum anyway. So, it's very difficult to be frustrated. I expect that, like almost every offensive coordinator, he probably runs the ball too much. But that's a me thing. I don't love running the ball. But I would expect that that's going to be a thing where he's going to run the ball. But I can't imagine he runs the ball nearly as much as the Vikings do right now, for example, where they're second in the league in running on second and long behind the Jets, who they had a quarterback with Bono. Of course they're going to run it. So yeah, I wouldn't even expect the run frequency in New York to be that significant in terms of translating to what you have in Denver, because A, you've got Saquon Barkley, and it's very tempting to use someone like that. But B, I don't think he called the plays in New York. So, I have no idea. There was probably a lot of things I could have been frustrated by, but honestly, that season was way too successful to really echo that many frustrations.
All right, well, we got one more question here for you. Just Vikings centered here. There's been some rumors. Stefon Diggs not too long ago did the eyes emoji on Twitter. I hate that. That is one of the worst things you could ever do. Of what the heck does that mean? But there's been some whispers that he is not all that happy there in Minnesota. And of course, Broncos country is making those connections of, hey, we have his old coach that he did really well under. Maybe the Broncos are trading for this guy. Are you hearing anything about Stefon Diggs' future there in Minnesota?
He thrives off of this. I think a couple of years ago he tweeted something you don't want this smoke or whatever, something like that. And a bunch of people interpreted that to mean something to do with weed, and he was clearly talking about he was actually talking about a video game. But people don't know how to interpret what he says, and that one was actually a really easy tweet to interpret. I was really surprised that took off. And since then he's just tweeted cryptic stuff all the time. So I've kind of stopped paying attention to it because he does that all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think it means anything. When you talk to his teammates about his sideline blowups and stuff like that, when you talk to his teammates, they kind of it feels like they don't even notice it anymore. And I don't mean that as in they're covering for their teammate and they don't want to cause controversy or drama. They have to be reminded, yeah, he threw his helmet at the sideline. You don't remember that? Oh, okay. It really just doesn't matter. So they're just kind of used to his outbursts and stuff. The only time the team had an issue with it was when he missed practice intentionally. He said he had an illness. He didn't really check in with the team about that, so it looked like a voluntary mispractice, and they fined him. But no, I mean, even if he wanted to trade, the team's not going to trade him. He's much too valuable of an asset, and it's not like he ratchets down his level of performance if he doesn't kind of get what he wants, because the reason that he keeps blowing up on the sideline is, it's not just that he wants the ball, although of course he wants the ball. It's that if they're losing and he doesn't get to dig them out, if he doesn't get to be a big part of the contribution of like a comeback or something like that, then he gets super frustrated. So, if they're winning, he doesn't care if he doesn't get the ball. If they're losing and he gets the ball, he thinks he's done everything he can. If they're losing and he doesn't get the ball, that's kind of when things blow up. And then that was kind of what was happening in Week 4 against Chicago when the whole storyline erupted between him and then Cousins apologizing to Thielen or whatever, and then right after that, the Cousins got like the Offensive Player of the Month. I wouldn't pay much attention to it. There seems to be more chatter among fans than there are among the team and beat reporters. Although, now that I've said that, of course, they're going to like announce a trade tomorrow or something. But from what I can tell, there's like zero truth or teeth to that.
Okay, well, way to crush Broncos country.
Yeah, sorry about that. Apparently, Washington fans have asked me this a lot. New York fans have asked me this a lot. Which, I mean, they had a diva receiver. I got rid of him.
It sounded a lot like Emmanuel Sanders. What you were talking about, getting involved, and hey, if they're winning, he doesn't get it, that's okay. If they lose, but he's gotten production, he's okay. If they lose and he wasn't involved, absolutely pissed. So that
seems
sounds
to be a wide receiver thing.
Yep, exactly. All right, well, thank you very much, Arif, for coming on. Do you have anything you want to tell the listeners where they can find you, or anything you're working on before we get on out of here?
I mean, you can always find my work over at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hasan. But otherwise, you can just follow me on Twitter. I get into like a lot of fights and stuff, so I'm sure it's entertaining. At Arif Hasan NFL, ARIFHASAN NFL. But yeah, I mean, I post like my podcast and stuff there.
Alrighty, well, that was our interview with Arif Hasan. We have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. We really want to just give a huge shout out to Arif Hasan. You can find him at Arif Hasan NFL on Twitter. Make sure you go follow that guy because he has plenty of great things to say, great football mind, and just really, really appreciative of him coming on our show and give us a little bit of time to kind of break down some of the new people coming into Denver and some major players for us. But now we want to get into this national championship game and just kind of talk about some of these prospects and just really dig into, are these guys we wouldn't mind having come to the Broncos, or these guys, what are their strengths, weaknesses a little bit. And let's start with Clemson. We'll start with the runners up here. And I guess we'll start here at the very top. And this is a guy that a lot of people after this game were going crazy for. And I even saw somebody tweet out something about how there's going to be some discussion. I think it was Adam Schefter actually tweeted out something about there's going to be some discussion of which defensive player should be taken first in this upcoming draft, and that Isaiah Simmons could be the guy that's taken first. I'm not willing to, I think that's recency bias of him having such a great game. But still, this guy is a special talent, very unique talent, a guy that's, I mean, you put him anywhere in the defense and it seems like he goes and has success. He's not your true inside linebacker, off-ball linebacker, whatever you want to call him. If anything, I think he plays more safety and slot corner than he does linebacker, it seems like.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of a bigger, faster version of Derwin James, honestly. And they kind of, Brett Venables, the defensive coordinator for Clemson, changed the scheme a bit to go more of to the Iowa State Big 12 kind of defense, where you can have kind of that roaming player, and it works for them. It works for them. We'll kind of see how it changes in the NFL, but right now I have moved Simmons up my board, unsurprisingly, because he's been so good. Don't think he makes it to 15 for the Broncos, and not sure exactly how his fit would be in this defense, but he's just so talented and can fill so many roles that, you don't overthink it too much. That guy can fit a role on your defense in any sort of package that you want and do it at a high level. So he was incredible out there. He's going to go top. I would be shocked if he gets past Jacksonville at 9. I'm really hoping that he doesn't fall to 12 and go to the Raiders, which would be annoying. And then they could get somebody like Laviska Shenault at 19, which would be double whammy. But I was really impressed with him. I was impressed with him in that Ohio State game. They used him in 2 different roles in that game, too, just to show how versatile he is. And how high do you think he is on my big board now after that game?
I'm saying top 7 at least, probably for you.
I have him at 4.
4, okay.
4 overall.
I almost said top 5, but yeah. Okay.
He passed Derek Brown for me. I think
I
really like Derek Brown. The thing with me is you can find defensive linemen in free agency almost every single year at this point. I mean, you have mercenary types like McCoy and Sue and Mike Daniels, et cetera, et cetera. But a guy like Isaiah Simmons in that back, how many roles he can fill, it's incredible. I actually, and do you know what I call his position?
I always called it the Joker position, where you just put him wherever.
Yeah, I call him Flash.
Flash, okay.
Flashbacker, kind of like Flash Gordon, the fastest man alive. So he's a flashbacker to me. Pretty incredible player, and I was thoroughly impressed. We should move on, though, I guess, because we're getting a little long here.
Yeah.
And don't want to have an 1.5 hour long podcast with our interview with Arif. But the next guy we should probably talk about is A.J. Terrell, since we're going to stick on that defensive side of the ball. And I thought he started off pretty well, but eventually Jamar Chase just ended up cooking him. Terrell, the biggest thing for me is that his technique isn't always the best, especially his footwork, and he doesn't always play the ball the best. So now he got beat by Jamar Chase. That's going to happen when you have a quarterback playing as well as Joe Burrow and a wide receiver as talented as Jamar Chase, who, honest to God, might be the most talented wide receiver in college football, ahead of Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, CeeDee Lamb, Laviska Shenault, et cetera. I mean, there's a reason he's the reigning Biletnikoff winner in college football. But I guess I did come out of that game with thinking less of A.J. Terrell, but I still think he could be a solid cornerback in this scheme. I don't think I'd love him with the Broncos' second-round pick now. Third-round pick, sign me up. But Broncos haven't done as well with those project-long third-round picks at cornerback recently. But, you got to keep on swinging at that. But I just overall came away less impressed with him. Thought he came out pretty well in that game. And he did. I mean, people are making like, he hasn't played any NFL wide receivers, and once he does, he stunk. I mean, he went up against a number of good wide receivers. I mean, Ohio State has like 4 or 5 really good wide receivers, and he's played up against a number over the past few seasons even. But overall, I think a stock down for him in this game, specifically as a top 40, 45 level prospect.
Yeah, I'm with you. It was definitely not a good game for him, but they also kind of set him up for failure.
Yeah.
We all knew he wasn't that true number 1 cornerback. So then to put him against a true number 1 wide receiver, yeah, you're asking for a lot of trouble there. I mean, they didn't, like I said earlier, they didn't have much choice. They had to try to take some chances to be able to beat LSU, and their risk just didn't pay off this time. And so I do think he'll be a pretty good pro. I think if you put him as a number 2 on the outside, I think he can be a pretty successful guy. I mean, the athleticism's there. You see the flashes of a guy that can be really talented if you got with the right coaching staff, which I think the Broncos could really turn this guy into a pretty good player. But I'm with you. It would be, if they took him in the second, I wouldn't complain too much, just because, again, the coaching, I would trust them to know what they're doing in the secondary. But yeah, I do think his draft stock probably took a pretty big hit of all the players, probably more than most. I would say his took a pretty bad hit.
Yeah, I agree. And then on the other side of the ball for Clemson, T. Higgins had a pretty good game. I'll be honest, I don't love him for Denver just because I want somebody who brings more either yak or speed to the defense. And while he uses his size pretty well down the field to come up with some good contested catches, I just don't see the ability to separate. and like they run a fair amount of, button hooks, slants, fades, etc. with Clemson. That's just because that's the flavor of the year in college football with those elite programs. But I just don't think he is talented enough overall and different enough from Cortland Sutton that makes me be head over heels with him at 15. And something else, people want to talk about Laviska Shenault's injuries, but T. Higgins is a guy who I feel like every single game I've watched him, he's running back and forth from the locker room.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. He's not in my top 5 wide receivers right now. I think overall he can be a top 5 wide receiver in this draft, but like you said, for the Broncos, I don't think he's that kind of fit, just because you already have what he brings to the table in Sutton, and Sutton brings even more than that. And so you need something more to add to the offense, because we've already talked about it a little bit, and we'll talk just the Shurmur offense. You need a guy that can run those quick pass plays, that can get open in a hurry, that can get separation. All those kind of things are a big part of this. You need those receivers to win those one-on-one battles. And T. Higgins just doesn't do that as consistently as you would like. It really is the bigger part of his game is making contested catches. So yeah, not too much there for me. But this next guy, this is one I do think the Broncos could take a really hard look at. I know you have some problems with a few of his comments that he made earlier this year, but you have Travis Etienne, running back, and the guy is just downright explosive. I don't know what other word to use. He looks like a missile fired and just explodes through the hole. Is he a speed guy? Yeah. Does he have some power to his game? Yeah. He's got a little bit of everything, but like I said earlier, your comment, or he made comments about not liking to be a receiver. And to me, if you're looking at running back in this draft, they have to bring some receiving talent with them, because it's going to be such a big part of what they're going to have to bring to this offense that the Broncos don't have right now. Now, I will say he has looked really good over the last few games as a receiver. Mm-hmm. And it looks like he has that ability. Just you have to question, okay, well, if he doesn't want to do it, or he's a little bit afraid of it, are there other guys that get elevated over him for that?
I really like Travis Etienne. I think I like him. Been liking him more and more. There are 4 really good running backs in this class. I would probably put Travis Etienne as the number 3 for me, behind DeAndre Swift, who is probably the best receiving back in this class, and he's just the most smooth of them. Number 2 would probably be J.K. Dobbins, because not only is he really good between the tackles, but he's also a good receiver. And then Etienne at 3, although Dobbins and Etienne are very close. I really like Jonathan Taylor too, but the amount of carries he's had and just how often he puts the ball on the turf scares me from him. But I like Etienne. If he's there round 2, you really have to have that discussion. That's a little earlier than I'd be looking to go running back personally. But I mean, a lot of really good running backs. I feel like the next crop of great running backs have been all second-round picks. So if he's a guy that you like there, I'd have no issue with it, because Freeman has done much of nothing so far. And, people like to blame the offensive line for Freeman's struggles, but Football Outsiders in 2018, the Broncos were the 5th best run-blocking offensive line, and last year they were the 6th best run-blocking offensive line. They are creating space for these running backs. And Philip Lindsay is a guy who's, we'll call it as it is, he's benefiting from the run-blocking, but Royce Freeman just not. So you need to get some more running backs there, and I'd have no issue with ETN. His explosiveness in the pass game, in the run game is what you want, and I think he'd be a good fit for this scheme. I'm not sure, there isn't much nuance to his route running right now, and with Shurmur liking to kind of motion running backs out and create some matchups in that regard, kind of with empty sets and whatnot, something he will need to improve upon, but he's shown a little bit more of a proclivity to bring in the ball as a receiver and take it the distance, or just create explosive plays. So I definitely like him. I was impressed with him in this game, and I think that he's going to be a really good running back in this league.
Right. And I will say, I think because of the system, running back value does go up a little bit, because you are using them more than just running between the tackles or being that guy that comes in to, sub in for the other guy. These are guys that are actually being used all over the field. And, you've talked about it before, of guys like Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, because they bring more to the table than just being a running back. They have this added value that makes them worth actually keeping around. and makes them worth being a valuable part of the offense. And the running backs that we're looking at, those are the type that you're trying to get. And so that second round, like I said, it's not where I would usually go. Usually third round or later is where I'm looking at running back. But because of the system and because of the need and also just some of the players in this draft make me go, I'm okay with some of that if that's the case, just because, like I said, talent and need line up at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. So we should probably move on now to LSU because they have much more draft potential players, and got to start off Joe Burrow, great player. Does he have some question in his game as far as the overall tools? I mean, does he have the strongest arm? No, and you see that with the intermediate outside the hash mark throws, but he's got such good deep placement and literally has eyes in the back of his head. His pocket manipulation is incredible, and he has a good enough arm. I think he's a slightly... do you have a comp for him? I guess that's a good question to start off.
I heard one today that caught my attention that I know is going to raise some eyebrows. But I think he has some qualities of this quarterback. Doesn't mean he's going to become this quarterback, but Joe Montana.
Interesting.
Just because he had the nickname Joe Cool because of his ability just to not panic when pressure was in his face, always be able to make the big throws when the team absolutely needed to play. And just really the elite skill. I mean, you're always looking at, okay, what can this guy do? What can he do well? And for me, Joe Burrow, his elite skill is his pocket manipulation. He's not a great runner by any means. He did have some pretty good runs in this last game, but that's not what he's going to be in the NFL for. His ability to extend plays because he can step up in the pocket or know where to step, like I said, have eyes in the back of his head, know when to get rid of the football. That is an elite quality that he brings to the table. I mean, you saw that on the very first offensive play that they had. Yeah, it got called back because of penalty, but you saw that. I mean, it just looked like LSU or Clemson had him dead to rights. And boom, he just emerges and throws it down the field for a perfect pass. Great play. That is his elite skill. And so that's the part that I'm comparing to Joe Montana. You saw that with Montana. You saw that, again, I know I'm listing Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Brady has that ability just to kind of move that little bit in the pocket that just makes you irritated beyond belief of just looking like they're going to be sacked for a big play or sack, fumble, whatever. And then all of a sudden he steps up that one step, delivers a perfect pass, and plays over, and your team's failed. And so I look at that kind of quality. Yeah, I don't think that he's going to make it to that kind of level because obviously those are two of the top 5 quarterbacks to ever play the game. But it's more just looking at his elite quality. Do you have one? Probably a better one overall. Like I said, I'm looking at one quality.
For me, the one that I've enjoyed the most with him is Tony Romo, because Tony didn't have an elite arm, but his pocket movement, magician ability in the pocket to escape pressure and field pressure was really good there. I also really think that maybe a lesser arm talent, Russell Wilson, is there, maybe a little bit better off or a little less talented outside the pocket, off balance, but just the ability to field rushers, escape rushers, manipulate the pocket, and deliver balls vertically with placement, touch, and timing. It really reminds me of Russell Wilson. So those are two that little bit more modern era that I lean towards.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I was thinking Russell Wilson with less athleticism.
Yeah. And he's not a bad athlete by any means. He was like a really good basketball player, and he can scoot.
Right. I'm not trying to – he's just not Lamar Jackson – Josh Allen, those kind of athletes that you're actually wanting to have be a part of the run game.
Trevor Lawrence.
It's well, he started showing it this year. That they really put that into their playbook more this season.
He's a lesser quarterback than Burrow right now, but he's a more talented quarterback.
Right.
He might be the most talented quarterback
ceiling,
I've ever watched.
Right. His ceiling is off the charts. Joe Burrow is the more NFL ready guy right now to step in, be your top quarterback, actually turn your franchise around year one kind of guy.
Yeah. 3 or 4 years older, too. So that for Burrow. So not shocking.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we should probably move on because we're talking about a guy that won't be there for the Broncos.
Right.
Lloyd Cushenberry started off a little rough in this game. The whole offensive line did as well, but improved around. I think Cushenberry is probably going to end up my number 2 center in the draft, I have my number one is probably going to be Cesar Ruiz from Michigan, who I really like the movement skills, the versatility, and the nastiness he plays with. I also really like Matt Hennessy from Temple. I'm not as high on Tyler Biadasz as general consensus, although it does seem that, and thank God, because I was losing my mind, but it does seem that general consensus is starting to turn away from him because his tape in 2019 was not that great. But Cushenberry, solid game. The guy on offense that probably impressed me the most besides Jamar Chase, who, again, not eligible, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I know that some people have been pegging him as a late round 3, early round 4 target for the Broncos, which I thought maybe was possible when like Hubbard and Najee Harris were getting more hype, but those guys returned. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the closer we get to the draft, I think the more people are going to appreciate his all-around game. I mean, not only is he good between the tackles, and also a solid pass protector, but he's also a huge back in the receiving game as well. I think he had like 50 catches this season, so I like him a lot. If he falls to the Broncos, the third round, I wouldn't be upset with it at all. I love the guy's, 5'8", 215 pounds, low to the ground, nasty, competes. Yeah, I like a lot what he brings.
Yeah. His ability to, the first guy doesn't bring him down.
No.
He's running through you, around you, whatever he has to do, he will find a way to make sure first guy isn't bringing him down. And a lot of times it takes 3 or 4 guys because his legs, you just see that strength in his legs that he's just not going to go down with easy contact. You gotta go low. You gotta go high. You gotta have multiple guys coming in trying to take this guy down, because if you expect one guy to do it, it's just not going to work well. And so that's perfect for the screen passing game. That's what you hope your guy can do, is make one guy miss. And then he's got a group of blockers in front of him to really take him to the touch for a touchdown. And Clyde Edwards, he has that ability for sure. And like I said, just his ability to run between the tackles. I think if there's a value running back in this draft, it's him. And I am worried a little bit that he's getting himself too high, just because, again, it's always recency bias. And this is what teams are left with, is what he just did in the championship game, where especially there at the end of the game, he closed out the game. I mean, it was not one of those, hey, we know we got the lead, so we got to run the football and three run plays, punt it. No, the guy's picking up first downs, making sure that game just is completely a blowout. And so adding that to the Broncos, oh my gosh, he is quickly becoming one of my favorite running backs in this draft. So in the third round, like you said, if he's there, you run to the podium and get this guy, because he is just such a perfect fit for what the Broncos need right now.
Yeah, I do like him a lot. I think do you have any other offensive guys we want to talk about here? Not really. On defense, I'll be honest, Rashard Lawrence is... Oh, go ahead. Oh, Justin Jefferson.
Let's talk about Justin Jefferson, because I know you haven't been as high on him as some other people. I mean, there's some that have talked about that they think he should go in the first round.
I like him more with the new scheme.
That was going to be my question. How do you feel about him now that we have Shurmur compared to Scangarello?
I like him more because of the 3 wide receiver sets. You don't have to have some real either vertical dynamic speed or as much yak ability, which, I mean, he tore up. He got a good amount of yak yardage in college, but I really think a lot of that is playing with an NFL level quarterback in that scheme. A lot of it is, hey, there's a bunch of open space and I threw it to you perfectly and you're perfectly schemed open. Go run. I don't think that's going to be the case so much in the NFL, but I think he's a jack of all trades, and I wouldn't take him in the first round. Personally, I don't think he has. For wide receivers, I'm learning more and more that those first round guys, they got to have some sort of dynamic separator, a trump card, so to speak. And I don't see that with Jefferson, but in the second round, if you can get him and he can be kind of a slot/Z, I would like him a lot in that regard. Kind of reminds me a little bit of a lesser explosive Stephon Diggs in that regard. Maybe a Keenan Allen is another comp that I've heard that I really like with him. So I like him there. I think he'd be a good pairing. Thought he had a good game here, but I mean, it's hard to... I think he had over 100 yards on 5 catches, too, but it's hard to really love him when you see Jamar Chase just doing ridiculous things.
Yeah, he's definitely more of a complimentary piece. You like in the first round to find a guy that's not just a compliment. I mean, I know we're looking for a number 2 wide receiver, but you still like a guy that, if need be, he could be a featured piece in your offense. And he has a good all-around game. He doesn't have one of those, like you said, he doesn't have that trump card that makes you just go, oh my gosh, Henry Ruggs, that is Olympic speed. He doesn't have that. You don't talk about like Lamb with his ability in the open field, his hands, his body control, all those kind of things are elite quality skills. So I'm with you. Second round, wouldn't mind him one bit. But let's go ahead and get to the defense here. And let's talk, I guess, the guy that probably got picked on almost as much as A.J. Terrell, Christian Fulton.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of funny that there's a freshman on the other side, and a guy that some people are calling a top 10 pick is the guy that's getting picked on. I mean, that's just as much about the skill on the other side. And just, I mean, he's one of the best freshmen in college football, if not the best freshman. But
I mean, there's a legitimate chance that we saw the first overall pick in 2020, 2021, and 2022 playing in Burrow, Lawrence, and then Stingley. Cornerback going number 1 overall, maybe not, but I think Stingley's talent is, I mean, I've never seen a freshman with his level.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And Christian Fulton, not a great game for him. Just had a lot of plays where he was out of position. Now, he did have that interception that ended up being a penalty. I thought it was actually a pretty decent play on his part. Just maybe got there a little early, a little bit of contact. I thought they could have let that one go away or go and let him have the interception. But yeah, not his best showing by any means, but he's still a very talented player. Great fluid hips, great athleticism, decent size for a cornerback, everything you're kind of looking for, and just not quite that finished product yet. You want to see a little bit more out of him when he gets to the pros. But he is a guy that some have talked about for the Broncos just because we need cornerback. But he's not my favorite cornerback, but he's still right there in that top 4, top 3 cornerback kind of conversation.
Yeah, I think he's my number 3 cornerback still. I think there's a pretty obvious difference between Okudah and the rest of these guys. There's a reason that the Broncos were looking at Okudah so heavily when they were picking, top 5, top 10. But I wouldn't have an issue with Fulton if the Broncos traded down at 15. It's much less palatable. But, unfortunately, looking at my big board, the Broncos, if they were picking at 10, they'd have had a chance at some real talent. But the drop-off from 10 to 15 could be severe and quick. So pray for quarterbacks and play for edge rushers to skyrocket up the board, because that could dramatically change what's available at 15 for Denver. But overall, I mean, I thought he was the best draft-eligible defensive back that I watched in this game. But, yeah. It'll be interesting. I think he's going to have to test well to prove it, and I think Diggs is the one that he's in main competition with. I still like Fulton, but he's probably more of a cornerback 2 than a cornerback 1, which first round, you probably don't want to use a first-round pick on a cornerback 2. That being said, it's like wide receiver. You need at least 3 solid bodies there nowadays to play against all the passing and the 11 personnel. So I liked him a lot. The guy that probably left the worst taste in my mouth coming out of this game for the draft eligible guys was Grant Delpit. And that play where I know he has been dealing with injuries this season, but missed tackle every 3.6 tackle attempts is absolutely just disgusting, especially for a Fangio defense where you're going to have a lot of one-on-one tackle opportunities with how they play this scheme, and that you just can't have it. I know he's talented. I know that he's, as a single high safety especially, he has a lot of value because he can cover a lot of ground with instincts and ball skills, but his tackling, I mean, let's just call it as it is. It's bull hockey. It's terrible. And that play, that end around with T. Higgins, where he took a horrible angle and then looked like he jogged behind him, absolutely garbage. That's just put that on tape and you see that. I see that, I feel like, time and time again this season. Now, he did have a couple good plays as well. He had a big hit, which I feel like I haven't seen as much from him this season, and a sack as well. But it's just the inconsistency, especially with the tackling and the intensity even. Just it's all major turnoffs for me. And I do have him in my top 20 for the Broncos in my non-quarterback big board, but he's my safety number 2, maybe safety number 3, depending on what you call Isaiah Simmons. I like Xavier McKinney more than him at this point, and I think for this defense specifically, hard pass.
Yep. It's I will be on my deathbed and still saying that him winning the award for top defensive back in college football,
the Jim Thorpe.
Was one of the biggest travesties in college football this year. And the fact that he was maybe third best defensive back on his own team and then he wins that award was just a travesty. So it just frustrating to see that. And I know it's like today we're recording this on the day that we find out Randy Gradishar is not in the Hall of Fame again. So I just had this on my mind a lot of these bad choices for awards lately that they keep making over and over again. But he did not have a great game by any means. Like I said, he had a couple flash plays, and that's what he's lived on most of his career is he has these great plays that make everybody sit up in their seat and go, oh, I got to watch more of this guy. But the more you watch him, the more you're like, oh, never mind. He's just not worth the few flash plays. And I saw somebody earlier today, it was a Cowboys Twitter, and they were going, Grant Delpit's going to fall to the Cowboys and be the biggest draft steal of the last 10 years kind of thing. I'm going, no, come on. That's not the case. I mean, he can be a good player. Don't get me wrong. And like I said, he's been dealing with some injuries, but there's still just, there's so many mental mistakes, so many making a business decision that you just, for a safety, I just don't see how he can be a top safety in the NFL.
And I think for other schemes, he should be rated higher. More of a cover 3 or a cover 1 scheme, especially one that prioritizes that single high, canopy safety. He can be very good there. You can kind of cover up the tackling there. But with how much, cover 4, cover 2 kind of looks you have with this defense, and even some cover 6, and how much tackling is imperative with that safety look, you can't cover up a safety. They're going to be exposed at some point, and they're going to have to be able to tackle. And he just hasn't done that. So a hard pass for me in the first round for Denver, unless they trade down to 26 to 30 and he's there, then we can start to have a conversation. But at 15, I don't see it at all. And the other guys in this game, I thought Patrick Queen stood out very well. Probably the best game of his career that I've watched. A lot of times watching him in the SEC, he's a good athlete, but he has horrible tackling technique. He'll come up on a guy, hit him pretty good, but he'll never use his arms. He plays without arms, which is incredible. And you see that with block shedding as well. So good game from him here, but I do want to raise some caution at least, because that was a game that was an outlier on the positive end of the bell curve. And then you have Rashard Lawrence. Look, I've seen him mocked to Denver a lot, and I know that his defensive line coaches absolutely love him. But for me, I don't think he is a scheme fit. I think he's probably more of a pure 3 technique / 1 technique, and a guy that I don't see being able to cover up enough gaps across the defensive front where he's a scheme fit for the Broncos. Yeah,
I'm with you on that. I wouldn't mind in the 3rd round maybe, but I've seen a lot of people talking about him in the 2nd round for the Broncos, and it's no thank you. Just not my top guy. I think there's some other defense linemen that are a better fit. And I don't know. He's on the small side of things when you're talking, not like weight wise, but height wise. I think he is a little bit shorter than what you like there. You like a little bit more length. You've always talked about that a lot. You like guys that have ability to keep a offensive lineman off of them with their arm length and things like that. But a lot of talent in this draft. Wouldn't mind seeing the Broncos come away with about 2 or 3 players from this game.
Yep, I agree. And now we're already getting long here with this segment. Maybe I'll go back and edit it so that way this is segment 2 and 3 here. But we probably should talk about the games on Sunday. And the first game we have at 3:05, I believe, Central. Hopefully I'm not getting that wrong. But 3:05 Eastern time, so 2 o'clock, would be the Tennessee Titans at the Kansas City Chiefs. Game is going to be on CBS, and the Chiefs are favored by 7.5 points. Now, this game is really interesting to me, and I think that if the Titans get a lead, not like the Texans did, but if the Titans can get a lead, I think that they have enough offensive smash mouth, power in that regard, where they can play much more ball control and keep away with the Chiefs offense. But if they have to play catch up, it's going to be over in a hurry. I think that's the biggest thing. I really like the talent on the Titans. I mean, A.J. Brown, they have easily the best rookie class in football this season. I think we talked about that on the episode that went up Wednesday, but their class has been killing it. I mean, Jarrell Casey and Jeffrey Simmons, honest to God, might be the best interior defensive line duo in football right now. They've been playing that good. Jeffrey Simmons, God, I look really smart being so high on him because he's been incredible, Carl. He's been incredible for a rookie defensive lineman. I mean, seeing how much Quinnen Williams has struggled, Jeffrey Simmons has been dominant. He's been I mean, if he'd have played all year, he'd have been Defensive Rookie of the Year, and no questions asked, in my opinion. He's been blowing guys up. And then you have Kevin Byard on the back end, which will be really interesting to see how he is utilized to neutralize the deep passing game with the Chiefs. And then I really like the overall defensive backs they have as well. I mean, you have Kenny Vaccaro, Adoree Jackson, Logan Ryan, and Amani Hooker. All those guys have been utilized and playing really well. And then the only thing I guess I don't love about them is the edge rushing that they have, but I think with the interior duo being so dominant that, I mean, Harold Landry and Kevin Correa, I believe the last name is, can be utilized in ways to control this game. But in the end, the biggest thing for me is the best player at the most important position in the entire NFL, not just left in the playoffs, but in the entire NFL, is Patrick Mahomes. He's playing at a godlike level right now. It's incredible to watch. It's infuriating to watch, but it's incredible to watch. And there's no better complementary 1-2 punch in football than Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. So I think the Titans have a chance, but I'm not going to bet against the Chiefs. Even with the 7.5 point spread, I think this Chiefs team is the only way they're losing is in the Super Bowl. I don't see them losing at home to the Titans, especially knowing that the Titans knocked the Chiefs out of the playoffs. What was it, 3 years ago now? I think the Chiefs are not going to overlook them. So I think Chiefs are going to win this one.
Okay. I will say, if there is a team that is set up in the AFC to counter a lot of what the Chiefs bring, of having that running game that can really shorten a game, keep it low scoring, make it that one score kind of game, it is Tennessee. And we talked about this in the last episode, that if there is anything that can disrupt a quarterback in the NFL, it is that interior pass rush. And right now, that's exactly what Tennessee brings, that they actually can force things. I mean, we talked about it with Houston. They were bringing pressure on the edge, but because there was such a middle pocket to step into, Mahomes easily could manipulate and get to the outside, those kind of things. So it's one of those, if Tennessee can contain from the outside and get pressure up the middle, I think that they can maybe rattle Mahomes just a little bit. Maybe they're going to need Kansas City to make about 2 or 3 mistakes in this game. I mean, I know Kansas City did that last week, and they still blew out Houston. But Tennessee, if they can get that, I think they have enough firepower with Derrick Henry just playing. You talked about Mahomes playing as the best player in football. Derrick Henry has an argument for that right now. I know he's not a quarterback, but I mean, just what he's doing on the field. And I know we talked about it with the offensive line. Yeah, they're a big part of it too. But Derrick Henry is he's playing at a whole nother level for running back. There's no running back in the NFL doing what he's doing. I'm still with you though. I got to go Kansas City, just being at home. Mahomes playing so well. Their defense playing pretty good. They didn't play their best game this last week, but they were missing Chris Jones. We'll see if he's back or not. I have a hard time seeing Tennessee keep up. And I know these two teams played earlier in the year and Tennessee won. But you have to remember they held, I think it was Kansas City, to 6 field goals in that game. I don't see them being able to do that a second time.
On the road, too.
Right.
Alrighty, and moving on now, we have the NFC Championship game, which will be at 5:40 Eastern Time, so what is it, 4:40 for you mountain folks out there. The Green Bay Packers at the San Francisco 49ers. This game was an absolute blowout earlier in the season, but the Packers, they're 7.5 point dogs here. I would say the 49ers are the better team on paper, but the Packers have an overwhelming quarterback advantage, I would say. And Aaron Rodgers has not been playing like Aaron Rodgers this season, but he was in that last game. So I think this game, I will take the 49ers, but I think the Packers cover the spread. I think this one is going to be close.
I'm going to give this one to San Francisco.
On the spread too?
No, not on the spread. Sorry. On straight up, I will go San Francisco. On the spread, yeah, I think it's going to be a close game. San Francisco just looks so dominant in that last game that they're one of those teams, like, even if Jimmy G doesn't play that great, they still can go win.
They win on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball in a convincing fashion. Right.
And so because of that, I just feel like they have a better overall roster by far compared to Green Bay. I mean, Green Bay has a pretty good roster, but San Francisco is just one of the most well-balanced rosters in all of football. and just defense, offense, everything. They've got it all. I mean, they've got weapons on offense. They've got a run game that just is dominant. They have a coach that's playing is coaching at a high level. And I guess I just trust, in part, I trust Kyle Shanahan more in a big game like this than I do LaFleur. And so I just, and it being at home, I think that's another part for me. Just San Francisco, I think they're going to come away with the victory. I think, like I said, I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be like 24-20 kind of score. But I think San Francisco does enough to win this one.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think the biggest thing is that the Packers lack weapons. I mean, Aaron Jones is a good player, but I see the San Francisco defensive front, specifically that front seven, being able to neutralize him. I mean, they got 3 or 4 defensive linemen that can win one-on-ones at a high rate. You know, Nick Bosa, DeForest Buckner, Eric Armstead, Dee Ford, and then you have the linebackers at that second level that just fly around. I mean, you have obviously my guy Fred Warner, but also you have the one that they signed whose name is escaping me right this second because
Quan Alexander.
Quan Alexander, yeah. So just so much speed. Biggest concern for me with the Niners is the depth of the secondary. They're gonna sounds like they're demoting Ahkello Witherspoon to special teams and they're bringing somebody else up. But again, the Packers just outside of Devontae Adams, the pass game, the weapons are not good. They're bad. I mean, they're straight up not good. I mean, Valdez-Scantling, Geronimo Allison, Jimmy Graham, you know, those are guys that you can get by with, but nobody who's good enough to do anything besides being schemed open. So I just think they don't have enough in the end. I really do think the Packers defense is better than national perception. You know, somebody who's actually been following them would know that they've been playing pretty well this season. Zadarius Smith he honestly should get some votes for Defensive Player of the Year. He's been that good. Kenny Clark might be the best young defensive lineman in football. And then you got some good players, Adrian Amos, Jair Alexander. But in the end, it's just there's too much talent on the Niners. I mean, you want to talk about like weapons. Their offensive line is okay. Laken Tomlinson at right or left guard is okay. Their tackles are playing solid. Joe Staley and Mike McGlinchey. But the weapons they have and how good they are in that outside zone with, you know, Kyle Juszczyk and George Kittle, and then you have weapons such as Deebo Samuel and Emmanuel Sanders. It's just an overwhelming roster overall. So winning in the trenches like they do defensively with that front seven, and then having so many guys and just a dominant brand, it's overwhelming. So I think in the end, the San Francisco Niners are going to win. And I think they are the best, most talented, most well-rounded team remaining in the playoffs. But, you know, anything can happen when you have somebody as talented and potentially getting hot like Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only reason I have any kind of hesitation is because of Rodgers. But like I said, he just doesn't have the weapons around him. He's really having to lift that talent up with him. And I think this is the game where they just get overwhelmed by another team with more talent and just a better coach that knows how to scheme and play things right. And they got a great defensive coordinator that I really trust to do a great job out there and shut down Aaron Rodgers. But I do think this will be the better of the two games on Sunday.
I agree with you there. All right, well, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. We want to give a special thanks once again to Arif Hasan. You can follow him on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL. He covers the Vikings for The Athletic and one of the better X's and O's guys out there, not just for the Vikings, but NFL in general. So we appreciate him taking time to come on here. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to Huddle Up Podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.